Welcome everyone, and thanks for coming out to another Babes with Books. I'm here with my friends Leslie and Maya, and I'm Shauna. And today we are talking about one of my favorite genres, which is probably not these guys, but anyway, my favorite genre, which is classics. So, classics, yes. So one of the reasons why I wanted to pick this one is I want to talk about Pride and Prejudice, and it is my very, very favorite book. I try to read it every Christmas time, and I love the movie. And
so you've read that one several
times. I've read this one several times.
Is it because of the steamy sex scenes?
Yeah, there's no sex scenes.
Aww, classics.
Who doesn't want to be Elizabeth Bennet?
Well, yeah, exactly.
Right?
The classics, Darcy, come on.
Do classics typically not have sex scenes in them? I'm curious what you guys' thoughts on that are.
Well, the ones I've read.
open.
Well, there's Lady Chatterley's Lover, but I don't remember what the sex
I guess
was like in that
it's,
one.
as we're going to discuss, it depends on what era of the classic you're reading. I don't
So
think
glad
it-
you said that, because I'm like, so then 100 years from now, are they going to be talking about 50 Shades of Grey as
No.
a classic?
No.
But will they?
No, too much tradition. Here, hang on. I had fun because I just like to do this. Judged over a period of time to be one of the highest qualities and outstanding of its kind. So it is it is not going to be considered a classic. It will be known as having a lot of people have read it. It will be a bestseller. A classic?
I don't know.
I'm not.
I disagree. I know that there's an official definition and all, but I think a lot of people throw out that term classic. I know in literature or in books it's a little bit different. But when you think about films or other pop culture or things that you remember, when someone mentions something, they go, "Oh yeah, classic."
Well,
right?
true. There is that use of that.
So there's the cult classic.
Yes.
There's my personal kind of thought about classics is that it's something that in 100 years will you still be talking about it?
No, I do not. If we're gonna go with that one, just going, I want to establish that I feel in 100 years no one will be talking about that book.
Not even about how odd it was that the whole world seemed to want to read it.
Not with everything else that has happened in the world lately and the way that publishing is going. And no, and the way that I especially on the heels, I think, of a couple of years later of the Me Too movement and all of that, I do not think that book will stand the test of time, and I think it will be buried.
Maybe. Yeah. It's interesting too, because I also kind of think of classics as books that influenced that genre of literature moving forward too. So I think that one might, whether you like it or hate it.
Well, when you talk about music, for sure, music that has inspired others or that people still use as part of their art.
Yeah,
that's
the repertoire.
So maybe books are the same?
Books would definitely, I think so. We pulled some classics out here, I guess, that we interpret as classics. But I actually struggle with the more historical classics and whether they still belong in that realm.
Like Emily Bronte?
How does she? Yes. Now, I really struggle because at this time, it was a publishing risk, is what it says on the back. Lurid and shocking, as well as a female author. I mean, so...
The character is male.
1847. So why are we... does this still belong in that? Or is it published at an age where there wasn't a lot published?
And that's the
thing.
So
therefore gets slotted into... So is it a classic literature time? Or is it actually classic literature?
When I was reading up on this too, I kind of got the impression that a lot of people felt that a classic was something that a lot of people had read. Like it influenced everybody because a lot of people had read that. Da Vinci Code, I think we have on the table.
I mean,
the Catholic Church said, don't read this, so everyone read it, and the other people were just like, that's a really cool, well-written book, let's read it, and whatever the reason that you read it, or didn't like it, or did like it, a lot of people read that book. But like you said, during a lot of the traditional classic books, generations of when they were being published, there wasn't a lot being published, so everyone read it because, number one, there was nothing else to do except read books. What did you do at night? You sat around and you read.
Yeah.
If you were literate, you played the piano. You didn't have Netflix and you didn't have all these other things to read. So it's interesting.
The only other thing that I will give you is, I'm going to sound maybe stupid here, because I think stories have been around forever. But in that generation of publishing and publishing fiction, These classics are kind of those base stories. Those base stories of love or deceit or jealousy or all of that combined, like Anna Karenina there. I mean, you can tell by its size that it definitely has a lot of the above. So is that also, though, why they are considered classics? Because they are some of the first that we see in fiction or that resonated in fiction and stuck around because so many people did read them.
Yeah.
That they stay. I don't know. It's a really interesting.
I think it also like leads to and you know, as working with the schools and stuff like that, ones that are chosen to be in schools, there's a certain like reason or criteria that you read that. We've done a few of those books, as well. What was it?
We had to read this one.
Oh, I read that at university.
Apprenticeship of Denny Kravitz. We had to read it in high
Canadian
school.
classic. Yeah, I read that at university and did a paper on it.
And there's tons of, like, I'm working at the middle school. There's a lot of books that, like Touching Spirit Bear is an example of another Canadian book, but that the kids are having a hard time relating to, even though they're supposed to read it. So it's hard to.
And I'm surprised that you say you read Pride and Prejudice every year, because I want to love a classic. I got to tell you, I do. And actually, there is a classic that I reread quite frequently. Like, I do read, I tend to read Ellen Montgomery quite frequently. But I think I should pick up a classic. And I've tried a few times. And actually, when I went to look at this month, we have a number on our bookshelves that I think we want to read. And I don't.
So, back to, you said Pride and Prejudice. So, before we move on to your choice, Maya, why did you choose Pride and Prejudice? Why do you read it every year? What is it about classics that appeals to you?
Well, for me, it's that traditional falling in love and chivalry and those kinds of.
We all want like a knight, right?
Yeah, but also that there's knight. Well, he's not really a knight, but the strong woman character, right?
I like that about Pride and Prejudice.
That's what I like about
I
it.
mean, yes, I've read it, and Elizabeth Bennet's pretty. Actually, I like all of Jane Austen for that main character. There are some side characters that I don't love, and I don't necessarily love the stories, but I like the main character usually. Emma's pretty fun. Yeah. So.
And the language in it isn't as difficult to read as Bronte. So I tried to read this book. This is one I've always had on my list. And
I read Wuthering Heights in high school.
Hard to read. It's just there are a lot of like 7, 8, 9.
Well, it's a different language too, right? Our language does change. A lot of books that are published nowadays are shorter chapters, easier language, because what we are used to doing, contemporary thought, is different now, right?
Yeah.
So
I think I like to recognize the language in a book. Yeah. And I think that the Victorian language just doesn't resonate with me. So when I pick one up, I get a little lost.
And I really like it in general, but this was way too hard.
So which one did you read for this month?
Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. It's a reread for me. So it was a read in high school. I had to do it for an English class. And it was one of those books that I think I went into and I was really shocked at enjoying. And I felt the same way this time, actually. Really fun kind of adventure story, which I don't know that you get as many of today. Really just like a classic, almost Indiana Jones style, or
Legend of Zorro.
Yeah, like that kind of style. And I don't pick that up in a book. Maybe it's out there and I'm not seeing it. So maybe you should recommend a good adventure story to me.
Princess Bride.
A lot of times I find they have that tinge of suspense or danger. And I mean, I guess this does, but not
danger nowadays is different. Danger is more about the fear of someone attacking you. Or
well, when when I feel like an adventure story nowadays, I feel like Da Vinci Code kind of encompasses what you're gonna get for that kind of big, like, intensive chases and such like that. And this one is not like that. It is, of course, I mean, I think it does have some love story. It's some classic literature in it. Some hidden identity. I really enjoy the writing of Alexander Dumas. It's not too flowery, I guess. And I would definitely recommend it, because I think it's a bit of a different classic for me. So maybe that's, again, why I liked it. As a woman, I do tend to go towards female-centric books, especially a female character. And this one is not. And I think it's a breath of fresh air sometimes. Without realizing it, it's a breath of fresh air.
Like,
so that would be and maybe that's why Yeah, so it's a fun classic.
It's true, actually, when you think about that. I read a lot of books that have female characters in them. And I don't know if that's because I'm reading female authors or it's the type of stories that I like to read. But even fantasy, I tend to. And I don't know, maybe people are writing that way now because they feel like, oh, well, we have to put a strong female character in it or nobody will read it or nobody will like it. Females are typically the people that do more reading than men,
it's a big surge.
Right?
Yeah. I think actually it was a big surge
in the
a bit away.
writing world. I love it.
I know, right? Because now I'm going to go down because I think females were surging, and then a diversity surge, and now this year I have read 2 novels, and I've heard of a few more coming out that are non-gender binary. So they're using words like they for a character because they don't want to use he or she. And actually it was really confusing the first one I read, but I digress away from classics in my excitement again about books.
Yeah.
So
I know, we get excited.
what did you read?
I read Frankenstein in lieu of the anniversary of Frankenstein. I was quite excited to sink my teeth into that one.
How many years?
100 years.
100 years.
Yeah, 100 years.
It's officially
There's a really big YA book
then.
coming out this month.
Yeah.
Frankenstein.
Yeah. It's interesting because, of course, it was really hard to read. Again, different language, different time, different thought processes, different. But I would still say it's one of those stories that when you hear, oh, I read Count of Monte Cristo, you go, oh yeah, classic, right? Frankenstein, oh, classic, right?
Check that box.
Check that, and it's not even about like the accomplishment of classic, but I think a story that becomes a classic is one that resonates. The story resonates for a very long time, like hundreds of years from now, or it's been hundreds of years and you can still read that and get something out of it. Same with Handmaid's Tale. How long ago was Handmaid's Tale written? And you still read it and people are like, oh, this new book that came out. Because they can still relate to that.
I love that point because a lot of books that at this point I'm like, that's a classic. I don't realize how long ago it was published. So
it's not the first one.
From a book person though. So Outlander gets made into a TV show. This book is now everywhere in bookstores, in grocery stores. Everyone is picking it up. And I'm like, what is going on? I read that in high school.
Yeah.
Like my grandmother, who's a big reader, read it. And I think she was like, oh, this was a good book. And maybe not high school because it's pretty sexy, actually. But so this is not even the first book. And the original publication date of this is 1997. Yeah. Honestly, that's a classic at this point now. Like that's 20 years of selling over and over and over and over again. This is still selling. Every bookstore probably stocks at least 1 to 2 copies of each book in this series on its shelves. And it's probably, I worked at a bookstore. It's probably on reorder. So what happens is like their computer thing sells one and it automatically reorders another. And not every book is like that. And that is a book that's going to stay on the shelf as a classic.
Yeah, because they know that
sorts.
It's going to sell again, right? So what about
50 Shades of Grey? No, I doubt it's on reorder at this point.
Well, not at this point. You're right. You're right. Yeah.
Because the movies actually make
So, that's a fair point. Like if a book that is, but I mean, these probably wouldn't have been on reorder until now they're republished. They have nice new covers.
Yeah,
no, actually there's
reorder
six
again,
different covers. If you go into a bookstore, wherever you live, like a big chain, I'm talking, they will probably have like 4 or 5 different Pride and Prejudice on the shelf of different covers because people collect the covers. So,
really?
Yeah.
Oh, new hobby.
Oh, yeah.
I finally found one that I like.
There's the really pretty, like, they just put out them, I think it's Penguin, and they're a very,
we have a
slightly
live
distracted
audience.
by
It's
it.
awesome.
Yes,
I
a
love
live studio
them.
audience.
They think you're hilarious.
I know. Or their chess game they're making up. There's really pretty, they're like primary colors, and then they have these little bit of like gold embellished designs on the front. They came out in the last couple of years and they're pretty popular on, if you're looking up like Bookstagramming and such.
That's the interesting thing at school is we put out the classic books with a new cover and the kids snap it up.
Nice.
Every time.
You should just put some movie stars on them too.
Oh,
just put like Reese Witherspoon on here and and somebody else.
I could have the same one sitting there, and I noticed that actually since I started. There's been a few kids reading classic books, and
I was just going to ask you. So, As a school librarian, you see a lot of kids coming in. Are they reading the classics? And so you've put the new covers out. They're picking them up. Have you talked to any of them about them? Like, what are they resonating? Is it like, not good, or what?
Well, I had the one that was trying to read Sherlock Holmes. That is a big book, right? She was trying, and she is a big reader. She devours thousands of words every week, and
she has a long red hair.
I love how you say that.
That's another
thousands
one. She's
of
another
words.
one. She's thousands of words every week, and she's put Sherlock Holmes aside for now because it was taking her longer to read it.
Oh, and that's not as fun as a teenager.
Yeah, and we have kind of a little competition thing kind of going that they get points for.
For
reading these books, so it was slowing her down. So
I was
interesting.
One of those,
because, like I said, she's an avid reader, so she can read fast. But she couldn't read that book fast.
I was an avid reader as a teen, and I was one of those teens that felt I should read the classics. One, I think I read many of them way too early, because I read Roots by Alex Haley in grade 6.
Wow.
Heavy.
This explains a lot about you.
So heavy.
Yeah.
Like, really, really
Very
intense.
though.
But actually, I do think that one impacted me greatly. But then there was others, like Great Gatsby, I think I read way too early. I think Great Gatsby is like late 20s, 30s type of book. And it's just so pretty and romanticized that a lot of people read it quite young, but I think you don't quite get those emotions that are portrayed in that classic about that marriage and that love and that until much later. I definitely felt I should do it as a kid. Read the classic.
I guess the last thing I was thinking of that we should maybe chat about is this whole idea of modern classics. So we've talked a little bit about how some of these newer books are becoming thought of as classics. I see Game of Thrones sitting up there. When does something, like, who decides what becomes a classic? Is it just society in general? Is it just you get to decide for yourself what's classic? I'm curious what our audience thinks, whether you guys have any opinions. What's your favorite classic? What do you consider a classic?
What's going to become a classic? What have you read in the past couple of years that you think will be on the shelves in 20 or 30?
Yeah. So what are your guys' thoughts on the modern classic thing?
Which one it should be, or?
No, just like in general, is there a thing as modern classics, or do we have to wait for someone to tell us what's classic, or what?
Well, it seems to point to sales, really. Like, really, how many people buy the book, which is sad.
Bothers me a little bit too, because ultimately it's not usually the people that decide on the sales, because what gets highlighted and featured is very much a publishing decision.
I don't actually know that I believe that, because I think there's a difference between initial sales and long-term sales. So I think long-term sales is a right thing.
Yeah.
Like, sorry, I'm distracted by some bookshelves behind me in this lovely bookstore. And no, I'm looking at the Wally Lamb book. Mm-hmm. That was in the height of Oprah's book club, and I'm not sure anyways. Yeah. It was huge. And I think of another one, Jonathan Franzen's The Corrections. I mean, those two authors both published a few other books. They did fairly well. I do not think that those books then translated into classic, just because they were massive when they first hit. Mm-hmm. I think rereadability for me is a big classic.
I was actually just going to say that, because there's a lot of, I think of the Da Vinci Code and how many people read the Da Vinci Code. Also know, working in the used bookstore, working at the library and donations, how many of those get brought here. So do people keep them and say, I'm never getting rid of this book? No, I'm going to take it. Somebody else can read it. I'm done with it, right? So rereadability are the ones, the classics tend to be the ones that you keep and you reread every single year. Yeah.
I know some people might scoff at this, because I know some people can be a little snooty about movies and books and which is better and such. But if you think back to the age when classics literature, like classic literature, starts getting created, you also have an idea of like a Renaissance man. I mean, I guess it's a lot earlier, but still that idea that a young woman should play the piano and should be able to do art and should be able to read aloud or recite aloud. So I do think there's something to be said for a book that translates well into film or television at this point. I think that is the mark of an amazing story, because it is an art piece that is then able to translate into another art form that can resonate with more people in society.
Yeah.
And so I will give that to a book. And I mean, all of these on this table. This is a movie. This is a movie. Jane Eyre is like 8
Lost
movies.
World.
Great Expectations.
There's a
Gwyneth
ton of these that
Paltrow.
were made in
I
movies.
actually even think this Canadian classic.
Life of Pi.
I even think there's a
I
movie
think, yeah,
with Denny
there's-
Kravitz.
yeah.
So it's not even a new idea. That is something to me. And there was definitely a long time where I was like, the book is always better than the movie. But I think there's something to be said there that art can go
Well, and then
throughout.
you look at the rewritings of those stories too, and you think of like there's a lot of fairy tales that get rewritten over and over again because they're classic stories. But Pride and Prejudice and Zombies is another good example. So people are taking these books and they're saying, how can I make this different? Because it's an awesome story, but I want to make it another awesome story and brand it in a different way.
So one more mark. What about award winners?
Oh, God.
Sorry. The next Booker Prize is not immediately a classic.
What do you think?
Again,
I know it doesn't necessarily mean the kids will read it. That's for sure.
Yeah. Again,
guarantees that I won't.
I want to.
I really
want to read awards.
Yeah.
Like the Booker shortlist came out this week. I think another shortlist, maybe Giller, came out this week, and I look and I'm like, mwah, mwah,
yeah.
mwah.
I still have to read and that's the thing about deciding on a book because it's from a specific genre. Oh, this is a romance sticker on it, or it's in the romance section. I'm going to grab it and read it, or this has an award. It's an award winner, so it must be good, right? I much prefer it if I can read the back of the book, figure out what the story is, figure out the writing style, and see if it's something I want to read, rather than just someone told me I should read this, so I'm going to read it.
I forgot it was you, but I was just going to be like, hey, tip to our watchers that someone told me this week, but it was actually my fellow babe here.
What did I tell you?
I know. You're like, what did I do? That was so awesome. I need like back of the book for sure, if not more. I think reading a writer's style is huge for people. Characters, even how it's written. Yeah. Like, I don't love a book that starts at the end and then I go back through the story and then
I know what I told
you.
Like,
anyway, so my fellow babe here was like, well, just download the sample off Kindle. And I was like, say what? What do you mean? And she's like, oh, I always do that. I get the sample off Kindle to see if I'm going to like it. So if you use ebooks and you use the Kindle app, you press download sample.
Just keep going.
You get about 10 pages, and you can definitely start to feel if you're going to get into that story right away. Whether you're a person that sticks out, even if those first 10 pages you aren't feeling it or not. But I really love that idea. I've passed it on like 3 times already.
It seemed like a no-brainer to me, so I'm glad that I can...
This lady has the best book tips. Audiobooks, do not listen at a low speed. If you're falling asleep while you read, up your font size. I swear, she needs to publish a book tip.
How to read better.
Reader's tips. I know.
Oh, that's funny.
Anyways,
I think we're pretty much out of time for today, so yeah. I think... thank you for joining us. Thank you to Pandora's Books for helping us. I'll just speak a little louder because no. We are going to be joining you next month with horror. It is going to be an exciting month. So
I already done it with Frankenstein.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't really call that. It was more of a social.
Yeah, I have a brand new one. Horror's a whole nother. I mean, we always have stuff to talk about, but even looking for my horror book, I was like, what's a horror? Is it suspense?
Yeah, I don't know. There's so many, and you type in horror, and you're like, that's not a horror. Why do you call that a horror for?
No.
That wasn't even scary. But what's scary? I don't know.
Somebody says about it.
Look we're already excited.
We're always
cool about it. Because you're like, that's not a horror. And I'm like, well,
what? It's not a horror?
It's not scary. They say it's not scary. I'm like,
the book or the movie?
No.
Okay.
We're discussing it.
Oh, we have a head shaker in the background saying it's not scary either. When I thought I should read books, I tried to read Tommy Knockers in grade 5. That really messed me up for life, actually. So
well, it depends on what you're scared of too, right? But this is next month. Okay, let's talk about it next month. We're really excited. Thank you.